Let's look at vertical spacing. Just like pretty much everything else, Dorico calculates vertical spacing automatically, all the time. Generally, if you're working in write mode, it'll work around whatever you put on the page, and it'll calculate how much space it needs based on the default positions of items. So as a reminder, things like dynamics and text, and anything else that goes above or below the staff, those things have default distances that they need to be from the staff in engraving options. See? If I click this dynamic and flip it with F, Dorico knows that I need more space above the violin too, so it pulls down that staff to make room for the dynamic. But if I go into engrave mode and drag the dynamic, Dorico isn't going to make room for it. I'd need to go into this staff spacing tool, grab the little square handle here, and then I could pull the staff down with the mouse or with Alt down. But actually then I'd need to move these staves too. So I could marquee select or click one handle and then shift down a couple of times to get the others. And then I really would need to use Alt down or Command Alt down to pull these down together. That's Control Alt down on Windows. Or I could double click on this box and type in the value I want. And the handle at the top of each system will pull the whole system up and down. But think how much quicker it was if I just undo this. Think how much quicker it was just to flip the dynamic with F. You really are best setting this stuff globally. Speaking of which, in the staff spacing tool, at the bottom of each frame, or each page, there's a percentage, and that tells you how vertically full the page is. Now, I feel like there's too much white space between these systems, and the staves themselves could breathe a little more. Let's go back to layout options. This vertical spacing section can save you so much time. You could totally play with these numbers at the top, and if you're working with a symphony orchestra, then by default, you have a bigger gap between, say, the wind and the brass than between the violas and cellos. And really, despite these being called ideal gaps, they're minimum gaps. What's often quicker, and what I'm going to do here, is scroll down to the vertical justification settings. And let me just remind you, these percentages down here are quite high. By default, when a page is more than 80% full, it's only going to justify the gaps between systems. That means it's going to put exactly this minimum gap between each of these staves, plus a little extra space if there's a dynamic or some text or a note with ledger lines. But it's going to put all of the other empty space between the systems. So if I turn this number up to say 90%, that's going to stretch the staves apart a bit more to fill the space. If you feel like they're now too stretched, you could turn up the inter-system gap, which, remember, is basically a minimum, and that's going to force the staves a little closer together, like this. Let me scroll back to the start. If I scroll a little further down this dialog, there's Hide Empty Staves, which is layout specific. So if I set that to all systems, you'll see my cellos disappeared on the first system, as it was empty. If you want to set that globally and then bypass it, you can do that by selecting something, like this note, and then go Edit, Staff, Manual Staff Visibility. And then these Show and Hide switches do exactly what you'd expect, and Reset puts it back to whatever's set in layout options. These are overrides. And when you hit OK, you'll see that it's inserted a system break, and it's shown my cello. You can then change the staff visibility from any system break or frame break. Just double-click on the break, or select it and hit Enter. The one thing to watch out for, and this is by design, is that manual staff visibility even works on staves that have music in them. So if I tell the cello to hide, it's going to hide until I bring it back. So you want to be careful with this one.